Good morning, everybody. Hello, hello. It's Ray here with you on a Saturday morning. It's a beautiful spring day here in Iowa City, Iowa. I can't complain. It's very cozy. The birds sound extremely happy, which honestly makes me happy. And there's a tree right outside my window, which I'm looking over at, that is beginning to bud. And I'm not sure what kind of tree it is yet. My guess is that it's a maple, some kind of a maple, but I'm not entirely sure. And there are ways that we can identify trees before they have their leaves. We can identify trees, believe it or not, by buds. We can identify them by bark. We can identify them by branching patterns, whether they are opposite or alternate. And we can, of course, identify trees based on their leaf shapes. We can look down at the ground and look for evidence of what they've dropped in the past if they don't have their leaves yet. Did they drop acorns? Did they drop pine cones? What kinds of leaves did they drop? If they drop branches, what does the bark look like on the branch if you want to look at it up close because it's easier? And so on and so forth. So, one of the easiest ones is leaf shape that I have determined. However, it's not always um, very wise to ID a tree just based on the leaf. In some cases, you really can because it's so apparent. Like, I'll give you an example, the tulip tree. The tulip tree leaf is extremely unique. As far as I am aware in this moment, there aren't any other leaf patterns or shapes, excuse me, shapes like it. So that's a very distinguishable leaf shape. And a lot of us know what a maple looks like. However, there are a lot of different kinds of maples. So, what kind of maple could it be? And I've been a little bit surprised to discover that some oak trees have leaves that sort of resemble maple tree leaves. So, you don't always know, like I said, based on a tree leaf shape. And I used to think that was how you ID'd a tree, but now I know there are all of these other factors. So, we know that acorns come from oak trees. Pretty simple, right? What kind of an oak tree is it though? And if it dropped a pine cone, what kind of a tree is it? What kind of a conifer is it? Because there are all kinds of conifers. So I try and gather as much evidence as I can now to ID a tree. And sometimes you can get really lucky when you're using uh, Google Lens, and you can use that to sort of help you either rule out what the tree isn't or get closer to finding out what it is because the Google Lens was able to successfully ID the leaf shape and lead you to a bunch of results that help you see what species of tree it is, and then you've still got to do some work to find out what type exactly that tree is. And then the other thing I like to throw out there is the iNaturalist app is really wonderful. It's oftentimes pretty accurate. If you've got a high quality image, it's gotten really precise about determining what kind of a plant or insect you're looking at. I will say the last I tried using it on a stream, it didn't quite understand what it was looking at. But when it comes to plants, insects, birds, animals in general, you could have way more luck identifying what you're looking at if it's a high quality image than the Google Lens, is what I've discovered. Those are just some really helpful tools to aid you in discovering what you're looking at. That doesn't mean you should automatically trust the first results you get. because you want to also just in general get good at ruling things out for yourself. What I have discovered is that when I have a really um, reputable source on hand with excellent images and information about plants, insects, animals, etc., it's really useful to have those to go to and start to identify what you're looking at. You start to understand terminology better. You can make correlations that you wouldn't make if you had an app figure it all out for you. Not to say that you can't learn from apps, they do provide words that will also allow you to learn what you are looking at. However, the process in itself is not only a fun thing to experience, but it's also one that allows you to build upon information as you're learning. So I think that when we skip those important steps, we aren't learning as effectively as we would otherwise, is what I'm trying to say. I was let's see here, in 2021, I visited Big Tree State Park in Arnold, California, where there are giant sequoia trees, aka redwoods. And I got to see a pine cone that came off of a giant sequoia. And to my surprise, they weren't very big. I mean, smaller than my fist, if I can be completely honest with you. And so, what I learned is that 1 in a million of those seeds will germinate successfully and reach adulthood. It is so rare for a sequoia tree to germinate because there are all of these factors contributing to their success, but mostly lack thereof. And what I mean by that is all kinds of creatures eat the seeds. There have to be fires in order for the seeds to germinate. The lighting conditions have to be right. There has to be enough space in the ground, so on and so forth. There are all of these factors. Oh, yeah, and then of course the soil has to be, you know, correct for that type of a tree to grow in. So, and then not only that, but you get people who probably take them when they're not supposed to, was what I realized. And so you just have all of these factors, like these trees get massive, but they have really, really shallow roots. And so when you're walking around at Big Tree State Park, you have to be very mindful of where you're walking. And they've gotten better at building these wooden walkways that go over the roots so that they're protected from people who don't have a lot of awareness of what they're doing when they walk on the shallow roots, so that people will not even have to think twice about it. And then they did have one area there on the section that I visited where there's an overpass that goes right up next to one of the sequoias, or a couple of them, so that you can actually touch the bark if you want to, and in a respectful way. Don't peel the bark off, don't damage it, but you know, you can put your hand on it and you can feel it. And it's kind of spongy. It's very interesting, and the bark is thick. That's what I remember. When I was there, I was with my husband, and there were wildfires in the Sequoia National Park, whatever it's called, in Southern California, and we were inhaling smoke from it. And here we were basically in Northern California. It was just absolutely baffling. So that was interesting to learn about with those trees. You know, they're giant, they're massive, they get huge. And it was so sad because there was one giant sequoia tree out there at one point in time, like in the 1800s, I want to say. This thing got so big and so thick that when they cut it down, it could be used as a dance floor, just to give you perspective. And someone cut it down so that they could set it up at the World Fair. They cut this giant, massive tree down so that it could be used for entertainment. And if it was still there today, it would have been incredible to see. And it was so sad. I just remember it's just when you go on a tour, because I went on a tour, it was a free tour. This guy was wonderful. He was retired. He gave us a tour, so he explained some of the history of the park to us. And so he explained to us when the tree was cut down, what it was used for. That's how I know. And my heart just like sank. It's so devastating when you realize you could have witnessed something absolutely magnificent, but you didn't get to because somebody cut it down. I still carry that experience with me because it's so profound, and it's so important to be aware of how our destruction to the environment affects future generations. So it's very sad. And then there was another tree. It was the mother tree, was what they were calling it anyway. And it had like a heart in the middle of it, like kind of open heart is what it looked like anyway. And sadly, that tree got burnt down when there was a wildfire. And you know, the wildfires are important, you guys. Sure, we don't want them to destroy the giants that are there today, so they've done what they've been able to do to protect them by covering them in aluminum foil, like aluminum blankets or something like that, when the fires are out of control. However, like I said, fires are what allow the seeds from the sequoia pine cones to take root and germinate in the soil that will hopefully one day become mature giants if they are left undisturbed and, you know, they survive because they have the conditions they need to do so. I just learned so much on that trip. It was incredible. And I had been there one other time before, for sixth grade camp. There was a camp that I went to on a field trip in sixth grade for about a week called Foothill Horizons in Sonora, California. And so at that time, the giant sequoia that had like a carport essentially carved out from the center of it was still standing. However, that time when I went again after witnessing that, I have a picture of myself right inside of it somewhere, when I was in sixth grade. It was no longer standing, and there was a story about it. I think there was a storm that was so powerful that eventually it like just toppled that tree over. So that tree's no longer standing. But it used to be used as like a little carport. It's really interesting. I have a postcard somewhere that has that image with an Oldsmobile vehicle inside of it, just kind of hanging out or something like that, as far as I can remember anyway. And it was really amazing. It gave me perspective. I had once stood there inside of that tree while it was standing. And then I revisited it, like, gosh, I was like 32. So all that time later, like 20 years later, and it's not there anymore. And so you just realize, especially after an experience like that there's no guarantee that anything will remain. Everything changes, right? Everything changes. So it was neat to go back there and revisit. There was one giant sequoia tree that I remembered climbing through, because you can actually go through the trunk on one end, out the other. And it was still there, and I could still do that, but this time with my husband, and it was just incredible. I was like, I couldn't even remember how incredible it was. But it was all coming back to me because there I was again 20 years later. I had been 12 when I first did it, and that time I was 32. And maybe I was younger than 32. I think I might have been 31. Can't remember. But anyway, early 30s. Revisited that place, and I tell you what, it just reignited my passion for the environment. Because all that time ago in 6th grade at that camp, even though I got homesick, I also took with me a lot of magical experiences in nature. I saw frogs in a pond. I heard them. We went on night hikes. We heard all kinds of birds, insects. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. It was amazing. Oh my gosh, I really wish I could live in the woods because the woods are just such a magical place. I am very grateful for the parks we have here in Iowa City, Iowa. One of my favorites I'll shout out is Hickory Hill Park. God, I love that park. I used to live walking distance to it. Now I live over by a park called Willow Creek Park. It's not as restored as Hickory Hill Park is, but maybe over time it will be closer to uh, the way that Hickory Hill Park is right now. Fingers crossed. And maybe as an IMN grad, I can contribute to getting it there. Who knows? The one thing that's really great, I'll say, about Hickory Hill Park is that it has expanded over the years. It has a really cool story behind it that I just recently learned. It was actually owned by the Oakland Cemetery, the all of the land, and somehow, some way, I don't know that the details of that quite yet, even though I do want to look into it because I'm remembering now that I'd like to know the full story if possible, is that over time, what happened was the cemetery decided to gift the land to the city, Iowa City. And so they decided to restore the land to woodlands. And it's mostly woodlands. There are some areas where they would like to restore prairie, and they are working on it. There's one hill where they just did a controlled prescription burn, and because there was an invasive taking over called autumn olive, there had been thistle growing there with some bee balm previously, and it attracted all kinds of pollinators slash birds, including swallowtails, bumblebees, and our state bird, the goldfinch, to that area. And then when the autumn olives took over the next year, which I witnessed and it was shocking, those trees were not supporting our native wildlife in the ways that those other plants were. So what happened is the city of Iowa City, they hired some kind of third party to come and take out these autumn olives that were just taking over that area. And so I went out there, I've walked around. It's all flat now. They've completely demolished the area to pave the way forward for um, a restored prairie system. Here in the state of Iowa, we've got less than 1% of native prairie land. Now, if you know anything about Iowa's history, Iowa used to be all prairie land. And one of the trees that uh, coexists with prairie land is the bur oak tree. So there is a nonprofit organization out here called the Bur Oak Land Trust. They have several properties where they are doing everything they can to restore prairies as well as overall native ecosystems in Iowa. So we've got a handful of those here in Johnson County. The Turkey Creek Nature Preserve, which is sort of out by the Devonian Fossil Gorge, which is in Coralville, is really wonderful. And as far as I know, there is another one in Solon, but I can't quite remember what it's called. I've only been there once. So anyway, if you want to look it up and visit, just go check out Bur Oak Land Trust, Google it, go to their website, and then you can find out what properties they own and where they are. And there is a small prairie in Solon that I just recently learned about that I would like to see. There's a wonderful, wonderful landscape of native prairie that's been untouched, meaning has never been plowed ever, ever. It's been untouched in the Rochester Cemetery. So if you want to see truly native prairie, especially when all of the ephemerals are blooming and then a lot of the flowers are coming in during the summertime. It is very hot because you're out in a very open landscape. So bring an umbrella or bring a hat and sunglasses because you're going to need them. And make sure you wear sunscreen, especially in the summertime because it's really hot. It's very open. Those bur oak trees, they are huge. They get huge depending on how much room they have to grow. And the reason they got so big and get so big in the prairies is because they aren't competing with other trees out there. So they get enormous because they have all of this open area for their canopy to grow in. And they're massive. They get really wide and they're bark and their trunks are kind of twisty, and it's just a really interesting type of tree. And then there are all kinds of beautiful native prairie plants out there. Blazing Star is one that comes to mind for me, and I believe Columbine is a native here, and that's another one that I remembered seeing out there. I didn't see the Blazing Star. I don't know. I didn't see it, but I did see some other things that I didn't know what they were because I don't really know a lot about native prairie plants. I mean, I'm not around them enough to know what they are. And so one of the beautiful things about that place, and people visit from all over the world, you guys, it's that amazing. So that's why I wanted to share it with you is if you're ever in Iowa and you're going to be close to Iowa City, Johnson County, whatever. I don't remember what county this cemetery is in, but it's a beautiful thing because the people in charge of the cemetery, I want to call it like the Friends of Rochester Cemetery because that's what they call the people at Hickory Hill Park, the Friends of Hickory Hill Park, the Friends of Rochester Cemetery, and they might actually be called that. I can't remember for sure. They've had to vote to find out, well, do we want to leave this wild or do we want to start, plowing / mowing to make it look more neat and organized and whatnot. And so far, the vast majority of people are still voting for the cemetery to be left wild. And because of that, People of all walks of life from all over the world come to visit this unique, rare prairie ecosystem that exists here in Iowa. So if you're watching, thanks so much for watching. And I hope that, what I said made sense. I have a lot on my mind. I try to make correlations. I'm not always sure how I come off. So I hope that what I said was coherent. And thank you so much for watching on your Saturday.